Close your eyes for a moment and let yourself drift into a calmer space. Imagine the soft glow of a single candle flickering on a nightstand, its flame dancing gently as a cool breeze slips through a slightly open window. Outside, the leaves of an elm tree rustle softly, and somewhere in the distance, a carriage rumbles over cobblestones. Tonight you are safe, seated beside a hearth that crackles quietly, ready to listen to a story that will take you back in time. Breathe deeply and prepare to step into another life, another world. Now imagine this. You wake not in your own bed, but in the heavy wooden frame of a Victorian-era room. The sheets are crisp linen, a little scratchier than you're used to, and the air feels cool because central heating does not yet exist. Sunlight streams through lace curtains, illuminating a modest chamber filled with furniture carved from dark oak. On the wall, a portrait of a stern ancestor seems to watch over you. This is not just any morning. You have woken up as a Victorian spinster. But what did that mean? What did it mean to be called a spinster in the 19th century? A word we now sometimes laugh at, but which carried a heavy weight back then. In the Victorian world, a spinster was not simply an unmarried woman. She was a symbol, a cautionary tale, and often an outsider in a society that valued women mainly for marriage and motherhood. To understand the life you've awoken into, we must first understand the society around you. The Victorian age, stretching from 1837 to 1901, was an era of strict morals, rapid industrialization, and deep divisions between social classes. Queen Victoria herself was admired as the embodiment of domestic virtue, devoted to her husband Prince Albert and their 9 children. Marriage was seen as not just desirable but necessary. A woman's worth in the eyes of much of society was tied to her role as a wife and mother. For men, life might offer a range of roles: worker, soldier, merchant, politician, scholar. For women, the paths were narrower. Marriage was the ultimate goal, and those who did not achieve it were often looked upon with pity or suspicion. The term spinster originally came from the literal job of spinning wool or flax, work often done by unmarried women. By the 19th century, however, it had hardened into a label for any woman who had passed a certain age, often as young as her mid-20s, without marrying. Now, as you sit up in your Victorian bed, you feel the weight of this label pressing invisibly on your shoulders. Perhaps you are 30, perhaps 40, but in either case, society has already judged you. You are no longer a young debutante attending dances in the hope of catching a suitor's eye. You are left behind, and in the cruel logic of your neighbors that makes you something of a failure. But let us step more carefully into this imagined life. Being a spinster in the Victorian era did not mean you were idle or powerless. Many women in this position carved out meaningful lives. Some became teachers, some became writers, and some dedicated themselves to charitable works. Yet society's whispers were always present. As one anonymous writer in an 1856 London magazine put it, "The spinster is an uncomfortable anomaly. She is neither mistress nor mother, and so must invent a role of her own." So, what did your daily life look like? Perhaps you live in a small town, your modest income drawn from a late father's estate, or perhaps from sewing, teaching, or working as a governess. Each morning you lace yourself into a corset, a ritual both restrictive and expected, and pull on a dress that falls to the floor, modest in its cut, but carefully maintained. Your hair, perhaps once worn in elaborate curls, is now pinned more severely. You may have a reputation for neatness, frugality, or quiet devotion. People notice you, but not always kindly. Neighbors greet you politely, but behind closed doors they may call you a maiden aunt, or whisper that you are past your prime. Children may find you stern, even if you are gentle, because they sense the difference, that you are not like the other women they know. If you are fortunate, you may live with siblings or relatives. Many spinsters were expected to care for aging parents or to help raise nieces and nephews. If you are less fortunate, you may live alone, earning your keep in a small boarding room.
Very fabric
and yet
of
within
our
this role,
society
there are freedoms
depends on
hidden
the
in plain sight.
cultivation of these
As a Victorian
virtues.
spinster, you are not tied to the burdens of childbearing, burdens that often claim the lives of young women during childbirth. You may not have to obey a husband's every word or manage a household of 10 servants. In fact, while society may mock you, you may also enjoy a measure of independence that married women cannot. You control your small income, modest though it may be, and you decide how to spend your days. Some spinsters took full advantage of this. They traveled, sometimes with other unmarried women, sometimes with siblings. They read books voraciously. They attended lectures, wrote poetry, or engaged in social reform. Florence Nightingale, for example, who revolutionized nursing during the Crimean War, never married and bore the title of spinster all her life. Yet she reshaped the very fabric of public health. Still, these were exceptions. For most, the label of spinster came with a sting that could not easily be shaken off. Newspapers and magazines of the era often mocked unmarried women as bitter, jealous, or unnatural. One cruel cartoon in an 1870s satirical magazine depicted spinsters surrounded by cats, suggesting they sought feline companionship in place of husbands and children. This stereotype would survive long into the future. Now let us pause again, seated beside that hearth. Can you hear the clock ticking on the mantelpiece? Can you feel the silence of a house where children's laughter never comes? Where the only sounds are your own footsteps and the faint rattle of a kettle boiling on the stove? This is the atmosphere of a Victorian spinster's home. Calm, perhaps even serene, but also shadowed by the weight of society's expectations. And yet your story is not one of despair alone. To wake up as a Victorian spinster is to wake up as a figure shaped by contradictions. You are dismissed and yet necessary, mocked and yet sometimes quietly respected. Your presence at family gatherings is expected. And though you may not have a household of your own, you are often the one others turn to for help. You are living in a time when the world is changing, factories rising, cities swelling, new ideas spreading, and in your own quiet way, you are part of that change. As batch one draws to a close, we have stepped into the room, met the woman, and felt the first weight of her role. In the next part, we will walk further into her world, exploring the customs of courtship and marriage in Victorian society, and how those who were excluded from that path navigated their identities. For now, rest in the candlelight and let the image of this life take root in your mind.
The world outside is changing faster than I ever imagined.
I think it is important.
Close your eyes again and let the image form. Lace curtains stirring in the morning breeze, the smell of coal smoke drifting faintly from the street outside, and the distant sound of church bells. You are still in your Victorian room, still within the body of a woman society has labeled a spinster. But now let us step further into your world. To understand your life more fully, we must look closely at what you have not experienced: marriage. In Victorian society, courtship and marriage were not merely personal choices. They were rituals woven tightly into the fabric of community life, filled with rules, expectations, and unspoken consequences. For young women, every dance at a ball, every invitation to tea, every walk through the park was an opportunity that might determine their future. Courtship was often carefully supervised. Middle-class families, in particular, watched closely to ensure that their daughters did not appear too eager or too independent. A lady was expected to be modest, demure, and above all marriageable. As one etiquette book of the 1860s sternly reminded, a woman's greatest charm is her reserve. Her virtue lies in waiting, not in seeking. The goal was not love in the modern sense, but suitability. Could the man provide? Did his family have a respectable name?
Cannot.
Was he sober, hardworking, and appropriately religious? Marriage was a contract, economic, social, and moral. For the wealthy, marriages cemented alliances between families. For the working poor, they ensured survival. A woman who failed to secure this path found herself outside the carefully drawn boundaries of Victorian womanhood. Now imagine yourself attending a village dance in your early 20s. The music swells, fiddles and flutes filling the air. Young men and women glance shyly across the room. Perhaps you dance with a few suitors, but none choose to pursue you further. Perhaps your family could not afford the dowry expected. Perhaps your appearance or manner did not fit the ideal. Years pass, and suddenly you find the invitations to these dances begin to dwindle. You are seen less as a participant in society's great matchmaking ritual, and more as an observer. By your late 20s, whispers already call you left behind. Marriage rituals themselves reflected the seriousness of this societal expectation. A Victorian wedding was not simply a private celebration. It was a public declaration that a woman had achieved her role. The white dress, popularized by Queen Victoria herself, became a symbol of purity and fulfillment. Bridal portraits were displayed with pride, and announcements in the local paper ensured that everyone knew the young bride had done her duty. Now place yourself outside this ritual,
It is our
watching from the
duty
pews.
to address the
You see
plight
younger
of
cousins
the
or friends
working
marry one
class
by
women.
one, the church bells
Indeed,
ringing as they step
their
into their new
voices
lives.
must be
Neighbors beam,
heard.
mothers wipe tears, fathers stand tall with pride. You smile politely, but inside you may feel the sting of exclusion. You are present, but
Good
your role is
day.
to witness, not to participate.
I have some
And yet,
provisions for you.
the reality of marriage was not always as blissful as it appeared. Married women lost nearly all legal independence. The doctrine of coverture meant that a wife's property, income, and even her body were legally her husband's. In contrast, as a spinster, you retained control over what little you had. Ironically, though mocked, you possessed a degree of autonomy that your married sisters lacked. Still, society rarely celebrated this independence.
And she continued to read
Instead, it
with
cast you as the
great
shadow of what might have
interest and
been.
devotion.
Popular novels of the time often portrayed spinsters as lonely figures. Aunt Norris in Jane Austen's Mansfield Park, for example, or Miss Havisham in Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. Both were cautionary images, one petty and bitter, the other broken and mad. These characters reinforced the idea that to remain unmarried was to become distorted, incomplete. Daily reminders of this ideal surrounded you. Newspapers published marriage announcements in prominent columns. Families kept scrapbooks filled with weddings, but rarely with other milestones of women's lives. Sermons preached about the sacred duties of wifehood and motherhood. Even the architecture of homes reflected it. Parlors and drawing rooms designed for entertaining potential suitors. Nurseries prepared long before children were born. As you grow older in this Victorian world, the gap between you and your married peers widens. They host dinner parties as mistresses of their households. You arrive as a guest, politely thanked but never central. They raise children who call you aunt or miss, even when no blood relation exists. You become part of the supporting cast in the great play of family life, never the lead actress. And yet there is another truth to be found here. Spinsters often formed their own communities, circles of unmarried women who lived together, supported each other, and sometimes built lives that defied convention. Some ran schools, others joined charitable societies, and some even pursued careers in the arts or sciences. Away from the gaze of marriage, they carved out alternative roles. Still, the weight of comparison remained constant. Each wedding bell you heard was a reminder of what society said you lacked. Each bridal procession was both a celebration and, in some unspoken way, a rebuke. As the church bells fade and the candles in your room burn low, remember, waking as a Victorian spinster was not only about your own choices, it was about living in a world where the measure of a woman's life was taken by a single yardstick, whether or not she became a wife. Batch 2 leaves us here, standing at the edge of the dance floor, watching the rituals of courtship and marriage play out before our eyes. In the next part, we will explore how Victorian society shaped the day-to-day duties and reputations of spinsters, the stereotypes they carried, and the roles they were forced to accept. Close your eyes once more. Picture the quiet rhythm of footsteps along a cobblestoned lane, the distant clatter of carriage wheels echoing through the fog. The world outside is bustling with the ordinary routines of Victorian life, but your place within it, marked by the word spinster, is something more complicated.
But what about
To understand this fully, we must look
concerns of
beyond the
our
home and into the
community?
broader society that both constrained and, strangely enough, offered opportunities to women like you. By the mid-19th century, Britain was changing at a breathtaking pace. The Industrial Revolution had reshaped cities, drawn families into factories, and
It will
created
be
both new
all right.
fortunes and deep poverty. Education was slowly expanding, with new schools opening for girls. And though marriage was still the expected destiny, a space was opening, narrow, precarious, but real, for unmarried women to make lives of their own. One of the most common roles for spinsters was that of a governess. Imagine yourself seated in a drawing room instructing a child in French verbs or the proper way to hold a pen.
Actually.
A governess occupied a strange social limbo, above the servants yet not equal to the family. Many novels, such as Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, captured this tension, the longing for belonging, the sense of isolation. For thousands of unmarried women, it was not a choice but a necessity to teach or sew or manage the education of the young. Others turned to charity work, a path often celebrated by society. Religious organizations and reform movements welcomed the energy of single women, who were thought to have fewer distractions than wives and mothers. Some spinsters organized schools for the poor, tended to the sick, or became active in campaigns for temperance and moral reform. Their work was sometimes mocked, yet often respected. Florence Nightingale herself, though criticized in her youth for refusing marriage, later became a national hero. Still, charity work was not the only outlet. The Victorian era was also an age of literature, and many unmarried women found their voices through writing. Elizabeth Gaskell, George Eliot, the pen name of Mary Ann Evans, and Christina Rossetti, all unmarried or childless, contributed to the great literary tapestry of their age. Though they were not all technically labeled as spinsters, their lives defied the strict domestic expectations that most women faced. Through their words, they proved that a woman could shape the culture of her society without a husband at her side. Imagine yourself now, seated at a small desk near a window, a quill in hand. Outside, lamplighters move along the street as evening falls. You write in the margins of your journal, perhaps a poem, perhaps an essay, perhaps simply your reflections. Few may ever read them, but in this moment you hold a kind of freedom. No husband interrupts you. No child cries out for you. This solitude, often described as a curse, could also be a gift. Of course, the wider society often failed to see it that way. Caricatures and jokes about spinsters circulated widely. Satirical papers like Punch published cruel cartoons of old maids with sharp noses and sharper tempers. Sermons warned against selfishness and pride in unmarried women. Even medical theories of the day suggested that single women risked hysteria or ill health if they did not marry, as though their very bodies rebelled against solitude. And yet, beneath this hostility, spinsters quietly shaped Victorian culture. They formed households together, sometimes living with sisters or close friends in arrangements mockingly called Boston marriages. They built communities, supported one another, and sometimes lived lives far happier than their married peers, whose burdens were immense. Childbirth, household labor, and obedience to husbands could wear heavily on Victorian wives. Spinsters, by contrast, though often lonely, at least retained some control over their time and choices. Let us return again to the stillness of your imagined Victorian home. The kettle whistles softly. The fire has burned low. Perhaps you have spent the day teaching, or perhaps you have visited the local charity to distribute bread to the poor. The neighbors will still call you Miss, not Mrs., they may still whisper. But as you sit in the quiet, turning the pages of a well-worn book, you know a truth hidden from their eyes. Your life is not only defined by what you lack, but also by what you choose. And yet this independence comes at a price. You are reminded of it when you walk past a nursery, or when you see young brides posing proudly in white gowns. The tension between freedom and exclusion, between solitude and belonging, is the heart of your existence. To live as a Victorian spinster is to dwell constantly in this balance. As we move forward in this journey, let us step beyond daily routines and look toward the deeper cultural currents, faith, reform, and the changing roles of women that slowly began to shift what it meant to live, and live fully without marriage in the Victorian age. Settle once more into the hush of our story. Picture the amber glow of a candle flickering against the tall shelves of books in a parlor, the shadows stretching long as evening deepens. You, the Victorian spinster, exist in a society where faith, morality, and reform are constantly debated. To understand your place fully, we must look at the larger forces shaping the world around you. Religion was at the very heart of Victorian life. Sundays were sacred, and for spinsters they were sometimes the busiest of days. Without a husband or children to manage, you might pour your energies into the church. Teaching in Sunday schools, organizing missionary fundraisers, or visiting the poor became common outlets for unmarried women. The church, though patriarchal, provided space for purpose. In fact, many clergymen relied heavily on the devotion of unmarried women to sustain their parishes. But religion was not only comfort, it was also control. Sermons reminded women constantly of their duties, and spinsters were often portrayed as women who had failed in their highest duty, marriage. Yet here again, contradictions appeared. By living unattached, you had time to pursue spiritual study, prayer, or charitable missions that few wives could afford. Some even traveled abroad, joining missionary movements in India, Africa, and China, carrying the Victorian sense of moral duty across the globe. At the same time, reform movements began to stir. The Victorian century saw agitation for the abolition of slavery, for improved working conditions in factories, and eventually for women's rights. While the suffrage movement would not achieve victory until the early 20th century, its seeds were planted by women, many of them spinsters, who devoted their lives to public causes. Imagine yourself at a crowded lecture hall in London in the 1860s. Gas lamps hiss faintly overhead, and the air smells of damp wool from the audience's coats. You listen to a speaker argue that women should have the right to own property or access higher education. Around you, other women, many unmarried, nod in agreement. They know, as you do, that marriage often strips away independence. The spinster, mocked though she is, embodies the potential for another path. Education became a powerful tool in this struggle. By the mid-19th century, new institutions such as Girton College in Cambridge began opening doors to women. Some of the first female students were unmarried, dedicating themselves fully to scholarship. Though society ridiculed them as blue stockings, these pioneering women challenged centuries of belief that female intellect was weaker than male. A spinster with no household to manage could devote herself wholly to study, and in doing so pave the way for others. The reform movements also extended to social care. Middle-class spinsters often visited slums, documenting the horrors of overcrowded housing, child labor, and disease. Their writings helped inspire reforms in sanitation and labor laws. These women, unencumbered by domestic duties, gave their voices to those who had none. Still, the path was never easy. The same society that applauded a woman's charity mocked her if she became too outspoken. To remain respectable, you had to balance carefully, useful but not threatening, active but never too visible. A Victorian spinster walking this tightrope lived in constant negotiation with the expectations around her. Pause here and imagine your own reflection in a mirror lit by candlelight. The lines on your face mark the passing of time, yet your eyes hold a quiet fire. Perhaps you are tired from teaching, or from attending a reform meeting, or from simply enduring society's whispers. Yet beneath it all, you know you are shaping a story larger than yourself. As we move onward, let us explore more deeply the personal side of this existence, the friendships, the companionships, and the small private joys that sustained spinsters in a world that often denied them recognition. For even within solitude, they carved out warmth, laughter, and connection. Let the hush of twilight settle around us again. Imagine the air scented faintly with lavender, curtains drawn against the cool dampness of evening, and a clock ticking steadily on the mantel. In this quiet, we turn from public reform and religion to something more personal, the relationships, friendships, and delicate webs of connection that sustained the Victorian spinster. Contrary to the stereotype of loneliness, many spinsters built rich networks of affection. Sisters often lived together, their bond replacing the expected companionship of marriage. Friends might share a home, pooling their incomes and providing each other with daily company. In the 19th century, such arrangements were practical, and at times deeply emotional. Letters from the era reveal tenderness, humor, and loyalty between women who shared their lives outside of marriage. Society, of course, viewed these arrangements with suspicion. The phrase Boston marriage, used mockingly, described two women living together independently, often without male support. Though many of these households were purely platonic, they challenged the assumption that a woman's fulfillment required a husband. Within the private walls of such homes, women could read, write, or work with a freedom seldom granted to wives. Imagine yourself there, sharing tea in the morning with a dear friend, planning your day of teaching or study, and knowing that at night someone would be there to listen, laugh, or simply sit in silence by the fire. Friendship was not limited to women alone. Spinsters often played central roles in extended families, helping raise nieces and nephews, nursing elderly parents, or offering stability to siblings in need. While this sometimes meant sacrificing personal ambitions, it also gave unmarried women a clear and valued role within family networks. Letters written to Aunt Mary or Aunt Eliza revealed deep gratitude for the presence of these women in family life. But there was also companionship in less visible forms. Journals, novels, and private diaries often became confidants. Writing to oneself could feel like a conversation, a way to pour out longings or frustrations that society refused to hear. Imagine your candle flickering as you write, confiding to the page the joys of a sunset, the sting of gossip, or the hope of something yet unnamed. At the same time, solitude itself carried both burden and blessing. Without marriage, you avoided the dangers of childbirth, which claimed countless lives in the Victorian age. You were spared the constant physical labor of household management, the endless pregnancies, and the demands of an often unequal marriage. Yet solitude could also cut deeply, especially in old age when friends passed away and family ties loosened. For some spinsters, the quiet became overwhelming. For others, it became a canvas, an open space in which to read, to think, to pray, to imagine. We must also acknowledge the quiet rebellions hidden in these lives. Some women forged partnerships that defied social categories altogether. Relationships historians now interpret as romantic or queer in nature. Though Victorian society lacked the vocabulary we use today, the closeness between certain women suggests deep bonds that were more than friendship. These partnerships, though discreet, allowed some women to find love and fulfillment outside the strict bounds of marriage. Now picture once more the intimacy of daily life, the careful laying out of a tea service, the tending of a small garden, the shared laughter over a novel read aloud. These details, though ordinary, were the threads that wove meaning into a spinster's life. They were not grand gestures, but they were steady ones, and they created a sense of belonging in a society that so often denied it. As we leave this chapter of companionship, let us turn next to the shifting winds of late Victorian culture, when science, medicine, and the debates of a modernizing world would complicate the very idea of what it meant to live, to age, and to remain unmarried. Settle into the soft glow of candlelight once more, letting the quietude of a Victorian evening envelop you. You, the spinster, have navigated courtship, daily routines, and social expectations. Now we explore a more private side of life in the later Victorian period and the early 20th century. The intimate struggles, personal reflections, and subtle rebellions that shaped spinsters' experiences. By the late 19th century, the pace of life had changed dramatically. Cities grew crowded, factories hummed ceaselessly, and newspapers teeming with advice columns and sensational stories reached more homes than ever before. In this climate, spinsters faced new pressures. They were expected to be paragons of virtue, models of moral conduct, and quiet pillars of society, all while negotiating lives that were largely self-directed. Daily life demanded careful structure. A spinster might rise at dawn, tending to her small household, writing letters, or preparing lessons if she taught. Meals were simple but formal, tea at precisely 4 o'clock, accompanied by reading or reflection. Yet within these routines, small joys could be cultivated. Gardening, sketching, embroidery, or music became both an occupation and a meditation, offering a sense of accomplishment and solace. Health and medicine, increasingly informed by science, began to influence women's lives. Victorian physicians often warned against overexertion or unfeminine ambitions, suggesting that intellectual pursuits could damage reproductive health. For spinsters, such advice could be both a caution and a liberation. Free from the physical demands of childbearing, unmarried women were ironically in some ways freer to pursue education, philanthropy, or the arts, though always under the watchful eye of societal norms. Social connections remained essential. Afternoon visits, letter-writing circles, and charitable committees created networks that were vital for emotional sustenance. Imagine sitting at a lace-covered table, quill in hand, as letters from friends recount stories of family triumphs, the births of nieces and nephews, or news of distant reform movements. Each note strengthens the invisible threads that link you to the wider world. Yet loneliness remained a companion. As years passed, friends and relatives married or passed away. Without children of your own, the future often felt uncertain. Still, many spinsters embraced the solitude as a space for self-discovery. Journals became treasured confidants chronicling ambitions, fears, and small triumphs. In this intimate practice, a woman could craft a life narrative unmediated by the expectations of husband or household. Some spinsters cultivated intellectual lives of remarkable depth. They engaged in correspondence with scholars, wrote essays for publication, and participated in debates within reformist circles. A growing recognition of women's education and professional contributions slowly shifted public perceptions, though societal prejudice lingered. Your life, like theirs, is a delicate negotiation between independence and societal constraint. Even amid these complexities, humor, curiosity, and creativity flourished. Afternoon teas might be punctuated with laughter. Sewing or reading sessions could spark playful commentary on the absurdities of etiquette. The spinster's life, often imagined as dull or empty, was rich in subtle textures and intricate rhythms, demanding skillful management of time, emotion, and social navigation. As night falls, picture the gentle glow of a lamp illuminating your study. The world outside may be bustling with modernity, streetcars clanging, shop windows illuminated with electric light. But inside, you maintain a world shaped by thoughtfulness, learning, and quiet purpose. Here lies the paradox. Spinsters were marginalized, yet they wielded subtle power, shaping education, charity, and culture in ways largely invisible to mainstream society. Batch 6 concludes with this intimate portrait: a life disciplined by routine, enriched by study, strengthened by community, and framed by solitude. In the next part, we will explore the emergence of modern attitudes toward spinsters in the early 20th century, as social expectations, industrialization, and war began to redefine women's roles. Imagine once again the soft flicker of candlelight across a Victorian sitting room, the faint aroma of tea mingling with the crisp night air outside. By the dawn of the 20th century, life for spinsters had begun to shift in ways both subtle and profound. Industrialization, urbanization, and new social movements challenged the old rigid expectations, even as society still clung to many traditional ideals. In bustling towns and growing cities, spinsters found new opportunities to participate in professional and social life. Women could work as secretaries, librarians, nurses, or teachers, roles that had been limited or unavailable to previous generations. These careers allowed unmarried women to achieve some financial independence, a measure of autonomy previously reserved for men. Imagine walking through a city street, gas lamps giving way to electric lighting, your dress modest but practical for work, as you navigate a world increasingly filled with commerce and industry. The early 20th century also brought new attention to education. Universities gradually opened their doors to women, allowing spinsters to pursue higher learning without the constraints of domestic duties. Institutions such as Girton College and Bedford College became sanctuaries for intellectual growth. Women studied mathematics, literature, science, and philosophy, often in the company of other unmarried women who shared their ambitions and curiosity. Health and medicine continued to influence life profoundly. While Victorian theories had emphasized the dangers of intellectual overexertion, modern medicine began to recognize the importance of physical activity, nutrition, and rest. Spinsters could take long walks, attend exercise classes, or practice hobbies that were once deemed improper for unmarried women. Their lives became a delicate balance of independence and societal expectation. Friendship and companionship remained central. Many spinsters formed lasting bonds with other unmarried women, creating households that were supportive, creative, and emotionally rich. These networks provided stability, mutual aid, and a sense of belonging in a society that often overlooked women without husbands. Letter writing, clubs, and literary societies flourished as extensions of these communities, offering spaces for discussion, debate, and shared laughter. Even as opportunities grew, stereotypes persisted. Newspapers, cartoons, and popular fiction still depicted spinsters as lonely, bitter, or eccentric. Yet within these narratives, many women quietly defied expectations, carving out lives of meaning, purpose, and fulfillment. They became educators, writers, reformers, and caregivers, often contributing more visibly to society than some married women constrained by domestic obligations. Imagine yourself in the quiet of your study, a ledger of charitable work open on the desk, a letter from a niece or former student beside it. Outside, the city hums with energy, trams clanging, children laughing in the street. But within your room, there is a world of calm, reflection, and accomplishment. This is the paradox of the spinster's life, marginalized in one sense, yet central in another. As night deepens and candlelight wanes, consider the lessons these women offered. They taught resilience, creativity, and the quiet assertion of independence. Their lives remind us that fulfillment need not be dictated by societal norms, that meaningful contributions can emerge from paths less recognized, and that the measure of a life is often found in subtle acts of courage and devotion. Batch 7 leaves us poised at the threshold of modernity, ready to explore in Batch 8 how wars, technological advances, and changing social norms further reshaped the lives of spinsters, and how public perception began to evolve in the 20th century. Close your eyes and picture the streets of a city at twilight in the early 20th century. Electric lights flicker to life along broad avenues, and the air hums with the clatter of streetcars and the chatter of neighbors returning from work. You, still inhabiting the life of a Victorian spinster, now witness a world in flux. Wars, technological advances, and shifting social norms are beginning to reshape the roles women occupy, and the perception of unmarried women along with them. The First World War marked a dramatic turning point. With so many men conscripted to the front lines, women stepped into roles that had once been deemed inappropriate or impossible. Spinsters, previously confined to teaching, charitable work, or domestic management, found opportunities in factories, offices, and hospitals. They became nurses on the battlefield, clerks in government offices, and managers in industrial plants. Their labor became essential, their independence visible, and their contributions undeniable. Education continued to expand rapidly. Colleges and universities increasingly welcomed women, creating vibrant communities of learning. Single women could pursue science, literature, and art with renewed vigor. Imagine yourself attending a lecture on modern physics or debating social reform with peers of like mind, your days stretching beyond the domestic confines of home, and your intellect unshackled by the expectations that once bound your gender. Technological innovation also transformed daily life. Electric lighting, indoor plumbing, and telephones made households more manageable, reducing the physical burdens traditionally shouldered by married women. Spinsters living alone or with companions could now enjoy a measure of comfort and efficiency previously unavailable, enabling them to devote time to creative and professional pursuits. Yet society's perception lagged behind reality. Cartoons and novels still poked fun at the old maid, depicting her as lonely, eccentric, or overly frugal. Despite this, unmarried women increasingly demonstrated that fulfillment did not require marriage. Many led meaningful lives, engaging in philanthropy, education, or social reform. Some became activists for suffrage and labor rights, using their unmarried status as a platform for independence and leadership. Personal networks remained vital. Women corresponded widely, attended clubs, and formed supportive households with friends or relatives. These communities offered emotional sustenance, collaborative opportunities, and spaces for intellectual exchange. Spinsters who once felt isolated now found themselves woven into new social fabrics, their lives richer for both choice and circumstance. Health and wellness also evolved. Progressive medicine emphasized the benefits of exercise, balanced nutrition, and mental stimulation. Spinsters could pursue walking, cycling, or hobbies that strengthened both body and mind, countering outdated warnings that intellectual or physical activity might harm unmarried women. As you sit in your candlelit room, or perhaps a small apartment with electric lamps, reflect on this era of change. Your life is at once more challenging and more liberated. Though prejudice persists, opportunities for personal growth, education, and meaningful work abound. You navigate a world where the Victorian spinster is gradually transforming into the modern independent woman. Let the soft hush of evening settle once again. Candlelight flickers across your desk as you reflect on the decades you have lived through. A world transformed from Victorian rigidity to the dynamic, modern society of the mid-20th century. The spinster's life, once narrowly defined by exclusion, has evolved alongside sweeping cultural, technological, and social changes. By the 1920s and 1930s, spinsters had become part of a broader movement redefining women's roles. The suffrage movement had succeeded in many countries, granting women the right to vote, while expanding access to education and professional opportunities. Unmarried women increasingly held visible positions in government offices, schools, hospitals, and the arts. They exercised influence not just quietly within households, but publicly, shaping policies, mentoring younger women, and advocating for social change. In cities, the modern woman began to emerge, a figure of independence, intellect, and self-determination. Spinsters, long accustomed to creating their own structures of meaning, were often at the forefront of this shift. They embraced careers, volunteer work, travel, and cultural pursuits. Imagine walking along a bustling urban street in the 1930s. Electric trams whirring past, shop windows displaying the latest fashions, and women like yourself moving confidently, no longer just observers of society, but active participants. The shadow of earlier stereotypes persisted, but their weight diminished. Literature, films, and journalism began to portray unmarried women in more nuanced ways, celebrating their intelligence, compassion, and contributions, rather than simply lamenting their lack of marriage. Meanwhile, companionship remained vital. Close friendships, family connections, and household arrangements with other women offered emotional sustenance and practical support. Many spinsters cultivated rich private lives, engaging in hobbies, writing, or community projects that brought fulfillment and joy. World events continued to shape opportunities and perspectives. During World War II, unmarried women once again assumed essential roles in the workforce and public service. Factories, hospitals, and offices relied on their labor, and their competence and dedication challenged long-standing assumptions about women's capabilities. Post-war, these experiences helped cement a new social understanding. Fulfillment and purpose could exist outside the institution of marriage. Health, leisure, and intellectual engagement also transformed. With better medical knowledge, increased mobility, and greater social freedoms, spinsters enjoyed longer, healthier, and more independent lives. Travel, reading, study, and civic engagement became common avenues for enrichment. The isolation once feared had, in many cases, become an opportunity for self-expression, education, and meaningful contribution. By the mid-20th century, society began to recognize that unmarried women were not anomalies, but integral members of the community. Their roles expanded across education, literature, science, healthcare, and activism. The term spinster itself began to lose its sharp sting, replaced with recognition of autonomy and accomplishment. As you sit in your quiet study, reflecting on a lifetime that spans eras of transformation, you realize the truth of your existence. While society once defined you narrowly, your life has been rich in purpose, independence, and influence. You are a testament to resilience, adaptability, and quiet leadership. Your story, once framed by exclusion, now illuminates the varied paths a woman could navigate, even in the shadow of strict expectations.